A very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here joined today to discuss a very important topic for which we have Gerald here as a speaker with us, which is on CITES. So for those of you who are not already aware about it, CITES is the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. This has been actually in place. I was just discussing with Gerald since very early times. In the 70s, there was a convention, and actually Singapore joined it in 1987. It plays a very crucial role in regulating the global trade of wildlife and plant species to ensure the sustainability and prevent exploitation. Particularly in the context of the medtech industry, CITES regulations impact the trade and use of certain materials which are derived from endangered species, such as ivory, certain woods, as well as some plant extracts, which are utilized sometimes in medical devices as well as medicines. Understanding these regulations is vital for all the companies which are operating in the medtech sector to ensure the compliance and sustainable sourcing practices. So, following this brief overview, our esteemed speaker who's here with us today, Gerald, will provide a deeper insight into what are the implications of the CITES regulation in the medtech industry, some of the key considerations and strategies for navigating this complex regulatory landscape. I was discussing with Gerald as well. There have been some addition of new substances which are added in the CITES appendix as recent as November last year. Which has also brought to the attention the need for having a more of a consultation from in various industries, including the medical device industry. I know Gerald will be speaking a little bit more on that, and we are happy to have a very engaging discussion with Gerald here today. Before I hand over to Gerald, I'll also like to introduce him briefly. So Gerald Neo is the Senior Manager of Wildlife Trade Team at the National Parks Board. He has a collective experience of more than 20 years in the area of CITES implementation and enforcement. He has represented Singapore to participate in various regional and international meetings, workshops, and conferences on CITES and the illegal wildlife trade. He also conducts sharing sessions on CITES to law enforcement agencies, industry partners, stakeholders, and members of the public. He hopes there will be heightened awareness among the community on how the convention works and how each and every one of us can do their part in wildlife conservation through sustainable and legal wildlife trade. So on behalf of APACMed, which is a regional trade association for medical devices and diagnostics in APAC, I would like to welcome Gerald to please take over the session and continue with this presentation. So over to you, Gerald.
Thank you very much, Bernice. And thank you once again to APACMed for inviting me to, brief the association on CITES and the medical devices industry. Now, you may wonder why the medical devices industry and what has CITES got to do with this industry? Okay, just to set the context straight before I go into the presentation was that of late, or I would say maybe as recent as a few months ago, we were notified by one of our importers that apparently one of the medical products, which is a viscoelastic product, apparently contains some animal origin used in one of the compounds, which is called chondroitin sulfate. So this apparently came from the blue shark, and blue shark was a species that was only recently listed in the appendixes on the 25th of November last year, in 2023. So with that, it serves as I would say a wake-up call to NParks as well, because I mean, for NParks, as many of you would know, or maybe even all of you would know, we are primarily concerned with your trees, your shrubs, your greenery, your landscaping, as well as probably wildlife management. But you would never really think about how you link wildlife management with the medical devices industry. So it serves as a learning point for us, because we also recognize that actually increasingly there's been a lot of products or devices that is being used that may possibly contain plant or animal origin. And we also have to be mindful that these plant or animal species that's being used in whichever industry you're in may possibly be that from the appendixes. So I think with that, maybe I'll just go straight into the presentation to let you have an overview of what I'm going to brief the session today. So the presentation outline will be basically a few as follows. So I will touch very briefly on Singapore and CITES, how we implement and enforce it. We have this online CITES application system that we actually advise applicants to go in to apply for any import or export of CITES-listed species. Some of the examples of CITES-listed specimens that is used in the medical industry, I will show you some slides and as well, of course, some pictures. A very brief procedural slide on how do you clear shipments containing CITES-listed species. What are the consequences for non-compliance to such imports and re-exports without CITES permits? And maybe a slide on the key takeaways before I take any questions. So Singapore and CITES. So CITES, as what Bernice has mentioned earlier on, so I'll mention again, is a very short form for Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Well, it's a mouthful, but actually it simply means that this is an international agreement or convention which agrees to actually sustain the trade in wildlife species to make sure that they are not threatened with extinction in the wild. So the mechanism of CITES works relatively simply in the sense that you actually need CITES permits whenever CITES-listed species gets in or out of the country. Okay, just remember that CITES permits are only issued for international movement of CITES species in and out of the country. It is not issued for domestic trade. Now, CITES actually lists endangered species in 3 appendixes. Most of those in commercial trade will be in Appendix 2, while those which are highly endangered, for example, all the high-profile species such as the rhinos, the tigers, the elephants, the marine turtles, these are in Appendix 1, and typically commercial trade is prohibited. Appendix 3 works the same way as Appendix 2, but it's probably less restrictive. You only need a certificate of origin. But I would say out of the 35 or more than 35,000 species of CITES animal and plant, I would say largely 70% will be those in Appendix 2. Now, when we talk about CITES also, we have to be quite mindful that we don't just talk about the live animal or the live plant. We also talk about the dead animal or dead plant, as well as any parts and derivatives deriving from the animal or plant listed in CITES. And as of today, there are 184 member countries to CITES. So earlier on, Bernice also mentioned that Singapore joined CITES in 1987, 9th of February 1987 to be exact. And in Singapore, you need to designate an official agency that manages CITES in that country. So in Singapore, there will be NParks. Previously, it was the now defunct Agri-Food and Veterinary Authority, but since 2019, NParks has assumed the role. So for CITES, what we actually do is that we have to enforce any non-compliances to CITES regulations, but CITES by itself, it is not actually a legal instrument. Every country that joins CITES have to enact their own legislation to give legal effect to the convention. So in Singapore, we have a legislation called the Endangered Species Act, or the ESA for short, which is the principal legislation that gives effect to CITES in Singapore. And in this act, there are several provisions on what the authorized officer of the act can do or not do. So basically, the need for a permit is spelled out in this act. Enhanced enforcement powers accorded to authorized officers in the sense that they have the power to seize any consignment if it's in non-compliance to CITES requirements, and even spell out the penalties involved for contravention of the act, which includes high fines or even imprisonment terms for serious offences. And also give you a brief, maybe just an overview of how this whole CITES process works, particularly on how one maintains the CITES appendixes. You may wonder, how did this 35,000 species come about? Who actually decides when this species should be listed in CITES or not? So now there's this very big meeting, we call it the mother of all CITES meetings. It's called the CITES Conference of the Parties, or COP for short. Now, this COP actually convenes all 184 member countries to CITES to one central location, a big conference center, usually maybe in the headquarters in Geneva, or maybe hosted by some other countries in other continents, that will actually discuss on various issues. But the main agenda in this meeting will be to discuss on the current appendixes and whether or not there is the need to include new species in the appendixes, to uplist it to a higher appendix or downlist it, and so on. So you can see from this slide over here, it happens every 2 to 3 years, not annually, but usually every 2.5, 3 years. And they will consider various proposals, one of which the main thing was to look at whether there's a need to amend the appendices to CITES. And then there is actually a voting system whereby they work on a two-thirds majority of votes to decide for or against certain proposals. So there will be adoption of the amendments of CITES resolutions and decisions, and also the appendixes amendments. And then, of course, there'll be a lot of other kinds of discussions during this about almost 2-week kind of meeting, where they'll recommend measures to improve the effectiveness of how CITES works and enforcement of the illegal wildlife trade. But I will not touch on this for this webinar. Next comes the online CITES application system. So we have a system. There's a licensing system that is actually through Go Business Services. So any application to bring in or out CITES species would have to get the permit through this system. So this is a Go Business Services system. You go in, you apply, and then you make payment online. And then once the application has been submitted to us, it will go through a 2-level process, backend on our end, to actually scrutinize the permit application, make sure everything's in order, and whatever supporting documents is required is there before we approve. So once approved, applicants have the ability to actually self-print the permit for them to clear the consignment through customs. On the clearance procedures, I will mention that in a little while. So how this works is that as with a lot of government related systems, applicants will log in using their unique ID, whether it's a SingPass for individuals or for entities, it will be a COPPass. Well, this is something which may be a little bit difficult to understand, but I'll try to condense it to make it simpler. So usually for any import of CITES species, once the application for the import permit has been approved, there will be this stock that will be automatically created backend in the system. Now, this stock belongs uniquely only to the applicant that applies for the permit and subsequently gets it approved. So, for example, company A applies for this, import of maybe a blue shark product, and once the permit application has been approved, the quantity tied to this blue shark product will be credited into this stock card system belonging to company A. Now, you may ask, why is there a need to? Because sometimes when you import something, you may not necessarily consume it wholly locally. You may want to actually consider re-exporting some or all of it out of Singapore. And in order for you to successfully submit it, the CITES re-export permit or export permit, you will need to have an existing stock to say that you actually have imported it previously. So by having this, what we call a stock card system, enables the system to recognize that these items that you intend to re-export were legally imported in the past. So basically, this is how it works. It's like a library containing the records of all the imported CITES-listed species. And in fact, this system will also allow you to transfer part or all of the stocks to another company if necessary. I'm just showing you this slide to let you have a look at how a typical CITES permit would look like. Now, this CITES permit, all countries that are member countries to this convention will adopt a similar permit format. So whether you're looking at the Singapore CITES permit, a Germany CITES permit, an Indonesia CITES permit, you will essentially see some similar fields. So what you can see is, first of all, you will need to ensure that there's a CITES logo on the permit with the full name spelled on it. Okay, but I will not talk about the rest of the foreign CITES permit. I'll just talk about our Singapore CITES permit. So our CITES permit has a scannable QR code on the top right-hand corner of the document. So basically, this allows the verification of this document to ensure that it is not being tampered with, it's the original document, and it is not being revoked by the government. So anybody can just scan, and what they will usually show is that they will also show a PDF copy of what you physically have on hand, and the contents of the PDF copy will be exactly the same as what you have on hand, the physical copy. And then the usual things like, it has to be printed, single side, plain A4 and black and white. And then just be mindful that every CITES permit issued is only valid for one shipment. Okay, in other words, you should not use that same CITES permit to clear multiple shipments. And there should also be no attempt to to reuse or even reprint a lost, damaged, or defaced permit. Our CITES permit is a secure document, so any incidents of lost, misplaced permit has to be reported to our authority, and we will advise on what is the follow-up actions. Okay, next comes medical devices. Okay, I am extracting this definition from WHO on what constitutes a medical device. So I will not read it out. I'll just let you read by yourself. So to set the context straight, we are looking at something which is quite wide. Okay, it can be any instrument, apparatus, implementation, appliance, and so on. So potentially, the medical device may not be just an instrument. It could probably be a kind of product that may or may not contain CITES-listed plant or animal species. So the next point will mention that any medical device or product that contains parts, products, or derivatives of CITES-listed species must comply with CITES regulations and procedures. The next few slides will show you what are the typical kinds of medical products that we encounter that is actually derived from CITES-listed species. Well, reptiles, particularly snakes, has also been used in the form of the production of antivenom. Okay, and this has been researched to actually for treating of hypertension as painkillers and so on. So some of the reptiles like the cobras, as what you see over here in this picture, is listed in CITES and will require CITES permits. Just now I mentioned about the two animal species. So even for plants, some plants are actually listed in CITES and also consequently will require CITES permits. And what you see over here is a picture of a Himalayan yew. It looks like a typical tree, but then part of the tree, the bark and the leaf, they are a rich source of this thing called Taxol, which is a potent anti-cancer drug and used for to cure a few ailments. And this was what I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, where there is actually the use of shark cartilage, from the blue shark, and it can be in a form of like a compound, or it can be a form of a powder. But we also noted that these are often used in trace amounts. In other words, in very, very small amounts compared to the relative amount of the entire product. But regardless, whether small or big amounts, you will still require a CITES permit for any imports or re-exports. Next comes the clearance procedures. The clearance procedures, basically for any CITES-listed specimen coming in or out, you will need to have CITES permits accompanying the shipment. So now for imports, you will need to have two CITES permits, one from the country of origin and one from Singapore. So without both CITES permits, when you present it for customs clearance, you may not have your shipment cleared because of the lack of one or both CITES permits. Now, if it's import via air cargo, we have an office called the Changi Animal and Plant Quarantine that you have to send your cargo in if it's listed under CITES. For imports via other modes, you can actually clear it with the customs. We call customs over there the Immigration and Checkpoints Authority, or ICA for short. Now, if you want to send out any CITES shipments, you may not necessarily need both CITES permits. That means you may not need Singapore CITES permit as well as the country of destination CITES permits, because some countries of destination, they may not require a CITES import permit to be applied on their end. So minimally, for any exports or re-exports from Singapore, you will need to have a CITES export or re-export permit from NParks. and to accompany the shipment when it goes out. So I just want to mention some of the consequences for non-compliance. Basically, if you do not have the necessary CITES permits, the shipment may be delayed in terms of the clearance or even seized by the importing countries for cases where it's being shipped out without any CITES permits from us. There may be losses involved in terms of the goods because of the perishable nature. It may be there's a need for storage at a certain temperature, and because of the delay, it causes the damage of the goods. And then if you can't clear it, you will also incur port storage charges and some associated costs related to that. And in addition to such things, there may also be penalties imposed on the importer or the exporter for non-compliance under the Act. So the commonly faced issues that we see were the following: misplacement of CITES permits, which means that actually maybe the exporter in this case may have already gotten our CITES permits, but in the course of sending the shipment, they may have gone through a few parties, maybe the brokers or the freight forwarders, but in the course of doing so, it gets misplaced and therefore it cannot be presented for customs clearance. Sometimes a case of no CITES permits at all. It could be a case of intentional smuggle, but we often see that it is more of a case of unaware. So they may not be fully aware of the requirements for CITES permits for shipments of CITES-listed species. So therefore, they have no CITES permits to begin with. Or sometimes they do not have original CITES permits. Now, when you clear shipments in or out for CITES-listed shipments, you will need to have original copies. You cannot photocopy it. You cannot scan it. You cannot show a digital copy. It has to be a physical copy as of now. So I will probably end in a couple of slides, but I think this is probably the second last slide. I also want to mention through this presentation, there's a few things that you might want to actually take a review. You may not remember every single thing that I say, but I think this slide probably will be important for you to understand how CITES works. So you just need to know that the convention works in a way that in order to monitor the trade, you issue the permit. Okay, so any international movement of CITES species into or out of the country will require the issuance of permits. Okay, and if you do not do so, there will be severe consequences, including delay and the implications, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, as well as penalties imposed, which will attract high court fines or even imprisonment terms. So you may also wonder, it's so troublesome. How would I even know whether this plant or animal species is in CITES? So I think anybody responsible for bringing in or out any of such product that potentially may be of plant or animal origin have to exercise due diligence. So what I mean is that you will have to check if, first of all, there's any of these parts of products or derivatives of animal or plant origin in the product that you would like to bring in or out. And then check against certain platforms, like for example, the Species Plus website, or even directly with us, whether CITES permits are required for its import. Okay, you may then ask, what is Species Plus? Well, this is probably my last slide. So Species Plus is basically a website that allows you to key in a scientific name or even a common name sometimes, and the system will be able to return you a result on whether is this species listed under CITES. So if it's listed under CITES, they will typically put CITES 1, CITES 2, CITES 3 in Roman numerals 1, 2, 3. So this will then give you an indication whether CITES permits are required. If it's not in the appendixes, they will return the result to say that this species is not found in the CITES appendixes. So this is an open source website. You don't need to subscribe to it. You can just, anybody can just go in, key in the scientific name, or later on, if you're interested, you can just go into this one and you just key in Blue Shark. They will tell you it's CITES 2. Okay, some other websites of references that you might be interested to take a look at is, well, of course, our NParks website will contain comprehensive information about CITES. The CITES website is basically a website that details all the resolutions, decisions. If you're interested in the history of CITES, everything will be spelled out there. And I would also like to take this opportunity to also mention to all members here is that you may not be able to absorb everything of what I say today in this presentation, but if you Well, I mean, if at a later time you remember, or if you have any other query with regard to CITES, not just limited to this presentation, you can always send an email to us. And this is our email as stated on the slide over here. NParks CITES email is cites@nparks.gov.sg. I think with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. I will leave the floor open for any questions that you may have. You can leave it in the chat box and I'll try my level best to answer all of them. If not, then I will take it back and I will respond to you at a later time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald. I think that was a very, very comprehensive presentation. I would say that before this presentation, even I was not aware of what CITES is, except the few conversations I have had with you. So this is really, thank you for condensing all the knowledge together and also simplifying it, because we do understand it's a very technical topic as you go into the details of this. I mean, everything starting from how the process goes about to the application system, particularly the case studies which you shared about their usage in the medical device industry. I think that's really helpful for us. But at the same time, it comes back to the question of how do I know, which is the biggest question, how do I know what it contains? So I think that species plus link which you provided would be really helpful for our members. So I would again ask all of them to actually have a look at that and see that. I think that would give a better information of, what all does it actually contain and what category does it fall into and what are the requirements in terms of compliance that all the members would need to actually go through in order to ensure that is taken into consideration. So with that, like we said, it's a lot of information. But we will, of course, be in touch with Gerald to see how we can also maybe provide some of the information which is there today in the slides across to the members, if that is possible. But at the same time, we have kept the presentation time shorter for this today so that there's some time for the Q&A session as well. So now the floor is open to all of you. I know we have already asked in the chat box as well. Please do come forth with any questions which you have, and don't worry if you're not able to come up with a question now. Gerald has already shared some of the email IDs and other links by which you can also contact them directly as well. So we can probably start off with the Q&A session. I can see that a question or so has already started off. So I'll probably also call on Aditya, who has been working with us at APACMed here, to put forth some of these questions and take forth the Q&A session now. So Aditya, let's start off with the Q&A session now, yeah?
Sure, thanks, Manish. So first of all, thanks, Gerald, for the insightful session. Now, as I already put a message in the chat box, I would request everyone to, come up with questions. It might seem like very simple questions, but I know it's like a new topic for everyone. So I'd start up with a question from Brendan Wong. Brendan, if you even want to directly interact with Gerald, it's perfectly understandable to talk to him. Else I can, just read out the question. Gerald, the question is that he understands that the destination will need to validate the CITES permit via a QR code. Do they need a special app to scan the QR code?
Okay, thanks, Brandon, for the question. It is an important question because we have also been receiving such questions. Apologies if we assume that this is actually made known earlier on, or we know, what are the things that to look out for when we want to actually verify using the QR code. So basically any QR scanner is that you can download from whether App Store or Apple Store can be used to scan our QR code. So what you usually do is when you scan the QR code, they will lead you to this website called verify.gov.sg. It's the government website. So in this government website, they will actually scan the results that you actually use, and then you'll return you some of this information. For example, they will tell you this is a document issued by the government of Singapore. It is not being revoked and it's not being tampered with. And on top of that, you will then see a PDF copy at the bottom of the screen that shows the exact details as what you have on hand when you scan the QR code on that physical copy. So you have to also ensure that what you see on the PDF copy matches to that of the physical copy. But usually, if there are 3 statements stating that it's not revoked and it's issued by the government of Singapore and it's not being tampered with, you should be quite safe that this is actually an original document and it is not a forged document. But in any case, it is always good to do a check to scrutinize the documents or even the details on the PDF copy to make sure that it matches to the physical copy that you have. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's quite comprehensive and very insightful on how we can use the QR code. It's like a modern technology nowadays. Everyone uses QR codes.
Yes.
Yeah. Probably I had a couple of questions that is pertaining to the medtech industry, and I think it's a good place to start off the Q&A as well.
Okay.
So my question would be like, how does the CITES regulation affect the procurement and use of materials from the various appendixes you mentioned, such as the shark cartilage, and what documents or permits apart from the document that you showed might be helpful or required for the compliance?
Okay, thanks, Aditya. I think basically,
Yep.
as a matter of good practice, we basically have to advise or encourage all our importers or exporters who potentially may be bringing in CITES species to actually, first of all, check, like I mentioned, and also as displayed on the slide over here, is that in order to determine whether are they listed under CITES, please go into this Species Plus website, key in the scientific name of the species in question to determine whether or not CITES permits are required. And if so, please reach out to us. We will be able to advise you on what is the procedure in place and what you need to do. In fact, if you think that you want to get more information on the procedures, you can also go through our site, NParks website, which is the first link that you see over here in this slide, where we actually show a comprehensive overview of the procedures when you want to import or export CITES species. So some of this information will include very specific details on the step-by-step instruction on how to go about applying for the permit through Go Business Services, what is the supporting document that you need when you apply for, say, maybe a CITES import permit and so on. So I would say by and large, any import or export of CITES species would require CITES permits. However, the convention also works in sometimes a confusing way, whereby they will have this thing called annotations. So annotations, just for information, is basically certain exemptions accorded if, say, maybe it is traded in a certain form. For example, if a certain type of plant species is traded in the form that it is already in a manufactured product ready for retail trade, then there may not be a necessity to apply for a CITES permit. But going into specifically the commonly used CITES species in the medical field, I would say I don't think there's any annotations accorded yet for some of these commonly traded species in the medical field. So I don't think you need to worry that much about the use of annotations. But in any case, if you have any queries on whether is it really controlled, fully controlled, or partially controlled, feel free to approach us and we'll advise you accordingly.
Okay, sure. Thanks for your answer. Other question that I feel relevant is like, how does the NParks ensure that permit issuance is efficient and at the same time it preserves species conservation? And the part 2 of the same question could be like, you just mentioned it previously, but for medtech products specifically, do we have any special provision, or is there any exemption when we talk about the medtech products, because it is critical to be used in the healthcare industry?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for NParks, we adopt what we call a rigorous permit system. So the permit system that we have, as what I've also shared in this presentation, will be this online application system and how we actually trace the movement of such species coming in or out via the stock card system, for example. So let's take, for example, an import application that we receive to import, say, maybe some blue shark cartilage from country A, for example. So usually for us in NParks, we adopt a risk-based approach when it comes to actually approving applications like this. Risk-based approach means we will first see whether there's a need to further scrutinize the foreign CITES permit that is being presented to us. Because typically for any CITES import permit applications, we will need the foreign CITES permit to be included as a supporting document to indicate that the foreign country has given the approval to export the item out to Singapore. So when we see such documents, we will then use, we have a matrix that we use internally to decide whether do we need to further verify with the country that issued this permit on whether this permit is authentic and issued by their office. Because we recognize that the use of fraudulent documents, even for CITES documents, can be seen in other countries as well. It can happen anywhere, and we have also encountered cases of invalid permits being used. So we have an internal matrix to decide at which point in time should we check and whether such consignments are considered high risk, or maybe is it coming from a country that we don't usually bring CITES species from, or is it a new species, or if this species claims that it is actually sourced from the wild, but we realize through our checks that maybe this species doesn't even occur in that country concerned and things like that. So there's quite a number of parameters that we use to check against before we decide whether to actually check with the country. So we will need to get a satisfactory response from the country concerned if we check with them in order for us to consider allowing the import. So I would say we have a relatively good system in terms of making sure that all these imports comply with CITES regulation, and consequently this contributes to wildlife conservation as well, because we are making sure that all these trade are sustainable and legal trade. For exports, we do not actually have an industry, or we do not actually harvest our own wildlife for export. So whatever that we send out, most of the time were things that were previously imported with CITES permits. So as long as the stock card system remains as rigid and in place, and that all these transfers are done correctly, then we should be quite safe that all these things that we send out subsequently are traceable and accountable, and therefore we should not have a problems in explaining the source of where we get the items from and so on. So I would say we have a relatively good and rigorous CITES permit system, and our traders should be confident that our system will enable us to actually justify all these items that come in and out are legal and actually with CITES permits. So I think earlier on this thing about annotations and exemptions, I would say that to be on the safe side, to err on the side of caution, I would think that it is good that we assume that any of these products deriving from CITES-listed plant or animal species would require CITES permit unless otherwise advised by NParks, or unless otherwise indicated on the annotation. As to how to read the annotation, I will not go into detail, but it may be a bit daunting and a bit confusing if you were to read the annotation and trying to link up on whether it's there a need for any CITES permit or not. Fret not, please reach out to us if you encounter such cases, or if you really want to check whether a species requires CITES permit, you can always reach out to us and we will try our best to respond to you adequately and make you understand whether a permit is required for any of such import or export.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. I think Aegis has raised his hand. We'll go by order. Aegis, you can even unmute yourself and ask questions
Yes.
directly.
Hi, thank you. Yeah. Hi, Gerald. Yeah.
Hey, hi.
Hi. Agus here. So
Yes.
yeah, it's pretty clear. I think I've been doing the CITES application. All the portal is well, everything is good.
Thank you.
But
Yes.
one things that remain one of my concern is actually on the custom clearance. For examples that from time to time we need to send a small parcel out, and we have attached all the import permit, the export CITES permit together with the pack, but at Singapore Custom, I think we have a recent incident whereby they didn't really endorse on those certificate. So I just have a question on the knowledge at our custom about this requirement, and how can they identify that this is required a CITES process?
Okay, thanks, Agus. Okay, to answer that, we have from time to time conduct sharing sessions with our counterparts from customs. In other words, we also mention on the requirements or the requests that we need from them in terms of doing the endorsement. I think maybe before I talk about this endorsement in detail, I would like to inform the floor that we have this thing called export endorsement to our CITES permit. So export endorsement is actually this box on the bottom part of our permit that requires inspecting official to indicate the quantity and when was the inspection conducted of that CITES consignment. But for Singapore's case, we have actually a provision whereby if the export quantity, the physical export quantity matches to that of the quantity listed on the permit, there is actually no need for an endorsement done. So in other words, if you want to ship out, say maybe 10 grams of blue shark cartilage powder, and you are really sending out 10 grams of the physical blue shark powder, so therefore customs do not need to do the endorsement. However, if you want to send out lesser to that of what is indicated on the permit, you will need to have customs endorsement, and that is where customs will come in to do the endorsement. Okay, on this part about the knowledge, I'm not sure, and I don't think I can speak on behalf of customs. There could be incidences whereby the customs officer in charge could be someone who may be relatively new or may have not undergone any of the sharing sessions with us yet, or maybe not entirely clear of what to endorse. So under such circumstances, actually the exporter have the right to actually request customs contact NParks to request for clarity on how to go about doing the endorsement. We have cases like this before whereby there's a need for request for endorsement, but the customs officer is not aware on how to do it. So we advise the exporter or the driver to actually get customs to contact us, and we will advise them from there. We have a working protocol with them, a standard operating procedure, whereby if they have any issues with regards to actually clearance of CITES consignments, they can reach out to us. We have a duty officer phone that they can reach out to us 24/7. So I think moving forward, if there's cases like this in the future where either they refuse to sign or they are unsure, I think it is good that you alert the clearing agent or whoever is handling the consignment to get them to reach out to us, and we will advise them from there.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. Yeah, just want to clarify. I think, yeah. So for instance, just to ensure that I get the point correct. So when we export some things out, as long as the quantity of the invoice tally with the CITES permit quantity, we don't actually need any endorsement. Anything lower, lesser than the invoice quantity and etc., then we need an endorsement.
Yes,
correct.
Correct, correct. That's right.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Gerald. One final question from my side is, we are talking predominantly about how NParks controls everything, and in other countries they have their respective agencies to, monitor the CITES permit. So can you tell us any instances of, how you collaborate with other agencies, mostly internationally, to, monitor and regulate CITES?
Okay, so as mentioned in my presentation slides, I think CITES is basically an international convention. So when we talk about international, we talk about cooperation with other partners, not just confined to national agencies, but also agencies from overseas. And also, our industry partners, our stakeholders, our members of the public, our non-government organizations, these are all important players in terms of helping to regulate the wildlife trade. Now, for cases involving illegal wildlife trade, in instances where consignments come in without CITES permits, these are deemed as non-compliance to CITES regulations and violations, or possible violations to the Endangered Species Act in Singapore. So under such circumstances, we have a mechanism where we will actually work with the implicated country on the illegal wildlife trade and see how they can actually investigate on their end. Okay, one example that I can think of is maybe if a shipment coming in that contains CITES species and came in without any CITES permits, we are actually obligated to inform the country of origin that, look, you have this shipment that was being shipped out from your country without CITES permits. And we will furnish all the details with regard to the exporter over there so that over there, they have their investigating agency that will evaluate and will conduct necessary investigations if they deem there's a need to do so, because actually any export of CITES species from that country will also be considered as a violation to their law. Because like I mentioned earlier on, every country has their own enactment of the legislation to give legal effect to the convention. So any movement in and out of the country without any CITES permit is actually a violation of the law, be it which country, as long as they are the member country to CITES. So we share in terms of this kind of information. Likewise, if there are implications whereby Singapore was being labeled as maybe the source country of an illegal shipment going over there, they will also likewise telling us that, hey, there's this shipment, under this person, this exporter, and with these goods, and there's no CITES permit. So they will just inform us. And likewise, the same thing will happen on our end. We will also conduct investigations to see if there was any intentional smuggling of the CITES species, or was it just a case of like a misinformation or unaware that CITES permits are required. So I would say we work very closely with foreign authorities, nationally, regionally, even internationally. Any tip-offs with regard to illegal trade in wildlife will also be taken seriously, and we will also check on whether the tip-off is actionable and whether can we actually follow up through this whole chain of like information. And if there's any need to, we will also consult our partner enforcement agencies like customs, the police, ICA, on whether we can actually work together on monitoring the shipment in or out, which is believed to be illegal, and conducting necessary investigations if there's a need to.
Okay. Thanks, Gerald. I'll hand it over to Benish now.
Thanks, Gerald, for those questions. I think one more question from our end, and I can see a similar question in the chat box. As you know, we were having a discussion just before the webinar on the process of adding, if there are new substances which are actually being added as annexures or in the appendix. How does that process happen? And you were sharing with me, there's a circular, which is usually issued, and that happens maybe an amendment every 2.5 to 3 years approximately, and to see how the effectiveness of the convention can be improved as well. With the latest development which happened around the chondroitin sulfate in the blue shark, where it was realized that it is being used, let's say, in cataract surgery and certain other particular uses within the medical device industry. I would like to hear from you on maybe if you're when this reach out is actually being done, is there a possibility for medical device industry also to be consulted? How are you thinking at optimizing this process of reach out moving forward as well with some of these recent developments which have happened? I will just pass on to you to hear a little bit more from you on that. Yeah.
Most certainly, the answer will be yes. We will definitely reach out to the association to inform of such things. But maybe I'll like to rewind a little bit before that. Actually, the process of amending the appendices can be quite a complex one. I can go on for a long time, but I probably just try to condense it within a minute or two. So essentially, when you want to amend the appendixes, there should be proposals made by proponent countries. There could be one or several proponents from different countries coming together to come up with a proposal to amend the appendixes to say maybe a certain species to be uplisted. Like in the case of blue shark, maybe a few countries collectively submit this proposal. Now, before the decision to amend the appendices comes in, there is actually a consultation process. In other words, before the meeting even starts, the proposal should already be submitted to the meeting for them to look through and see if there's any implications to the industry on listing this species in CITES, for example. Let's say, for example, if a blue shark is listed, or there's a proposal to list it into the appendices, and maybe that country has a heavy reliance on this species in their industry, or it's a livelihood of many of the people in that country, they may face some difficulties in implementing it, or they may have strong objections in including it in the CITES appendices. So all these things, it will be done during the consultation process. So I think moving forward, the next conference of the parties, before that, if there's any of these proposals, we will actually share all these with the association and see if there's a need for the association to maybe come out with a collective response, or whether is there a need to be concerned over the uplisting of this species, whether is it heavily used in the industry and so on. Because with that kind of information, the authority, which is NParks, will then have a more informed decision on whether we support or go against the proposal listed by some other proponent countries on listing this species in CITES. So I think the mechanism works in that way. And of course, if at the end of the day, the Conference of the Parties has already agreed to the amendment to the appendices, the next step, like what Benish you mentioned, will be in the form of a circular that we will transmit to our traders. So typically in the past, traditionally, it will be to known traders or association we know that possibly may be impacted by the change. We will send a circular to them, but we will also send a circular through Singapore Customs website for them to blast it out, whether in the form of a circular on their website or through the TradeNet system, so that all the clearing agents will likely have a copy of that as well. But going through this experience of the blue shark and with the medical industry, I think moving forward, we will still blast it out, regardless whether we think it may be of it may be of use in the medical industry or not, because you never know. Sometimes certain compounds can be actually extracted from certain plant or animal species inside this, but we may not know that it is actually used in the medical industry. So we don't want to take any chances. So we will still send the circulars over to APACMed to actually request your assistance to blast it out to your members, in addition to all the current practices that we have in sending to traders, as well as through the Singapore Customs website.
Thanks, Gerald. I think that's really helpful. Like you said, you never know. I think that's a similar situation sometimes we do have within the medical device industry also multi-tiered and very complex supply chains. So it is quite difficult sometimes, with different levels of suppliers also to understand if particular component is actually being used. But we do understand and we acknowledge the responsibility which is there for us as a part of the healthcare sector to operate in a very sustainable manner as well. And we, of course, support initiatives such as CITES as well. We understand how preserving biodiversity is not only a moral imperative, but it is a necessity for the continued advancement of a nation or globally as well. But at the same time, it's also a kind of a balance which we need to look at when we talk about the imperative of protecting endangered species, while at the same time ensuring that there is a necessary facilitation of medical innovation, patient care, and supply of medical devices that is actually being provided. So we are happy to work together with NParks and other agencies in order to move towards that kind of a balance for a more sustainable future. But we are really grateful to you for your openness, and we do look forward in the future as well for some of these notifications or some developments, if you find them relevant, also to share with us, so that APACMed can also share it with all the member companies in order to ensure that we are more prepared for some of these developments, especially with new additions taking place. I don't know if you have any further questions. I know we're almost at the end of the time. And if there is any other question that anybody has, we can, of course, send it across to Gerald as well. And we will be in touch with all of you. At the same time, just like we said, some of the follow-up items from today's presentation, we will be discussing with NParks separately on what version of the slides and maybe the recording, if that is something which we can share. And once that is cleared, all the APACMed members will have access to it as well. But give us some time to make the necessary clearances before that is done. Gerald, thank you so much for joining us today and for your initiative in reaching out to APACMed for this session. At the end of the day, it's very important for everybody to have the information. I think this session has definitely been very informative for all of us. Let us all take back some of this information which you have shared today. If there are any further questions on this, we will definitely be in touch with you. Any last words from you, Gerald, before we close the session?
No, like I mentioned, I think, this presentation doesn't just stop now. So anything that you have with regard to any inquiries on CITES-related matters, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to answer your inquiries.
Thank you so much. Just for all the participants, I think once this window closes, there will also be a post-meeting survey for all of you to fill in. I think it hardly takes a few seconds. So would request all of you to please also respond to that survey. And on behalf of APACMed, I would again like to thank Gerald. And like you said, it's just a beginning of being in touch with each other. So let's
Yes.
try and collaborate and have that kind of sharing of information on an ongoing basis moving forward as well. And thank you to all the participants for your questions. I think that really made the discussion very engaging. And like we said, if you have any further queries, Gerald has already shared all the necessary links with you, but please do let us know and we can connect you to the necessary authorities within NParks to answer your questions as well. Thank you so much, everybody. And with that, we'll end the webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.